I know that it was something that Sean mentioned at the end of his show. But I have to say, when I looked at the story regarding Green MP Tabitha Paul this morning, I just, there was a part of me that just went, yeah, but she's not alone, is she? Because the campaign of the Green Party and the sort of leftist woke council clique that run Wellington to not simply erase our colonial history and traditions, but erase our heritage and cultural icons as well, gathers apace. She wasn't on her own, Tabitha Paul, the Green MP. She was aided and supported by, on the post story that I read this morning, anyhow, for those of you who haven't caught up with it, a majority of Wellington councillors who said, yes, that's right, we need to tear down all these dreadful statues and monuments to people that we don't like. Now, this brain dead but inherently woke ideology is that basically it runs like this, that all white people living in this land, and in the 19th century in particular, should be judged through the progressive lens of a few folk in the 21st century, and if found wanting against those biased standards, be removed, forgotten, or publicly humiliated and reviled. It's a continuation of the ethnic hatred that's currently being stoked by the Greens, Te Pāti Maori and their fellow travellers, that white people in New Zealand are somehow a pestilence upon their beloved Aotearoa, as damaging to this nation's soul as well possums, rats and other creepy crawly invasive species. It's not original, of course. These New Zealand wokesters simply ape. They're similarly deluded, it has to be said, mentors, most emanating from the university campuses of the United States and the United Kingdom, aided and abetted by, well, Marxist movements like Black Lives Matter and all those sorts of things. And this lative derivative that's now reared its ugly head in New Zealand, and that's the only word you could describe it in actual fact, to tear down, remove, hide anything of our colonial formation, be it the New Zealand companies William Wakefield in Wellington, or the head of the British Empire at the time, Queen Victoria. Yes, even apparently Queen Victoria's on the list. You've got to now tear down all her monuments, all her particular statues that commemorate, because most of New Zealand indeed was settled and formed, certainly constitutionally, at the time when Queen Victoria was the head of the greatest empire the world has ever known. There was no empire in the history of humankind that dominated the world as the British Empire did of that time. But and it's the reason why we're all here. Essentially, this is our country. It's based upon, in large and good part, the colonial settlers who came to this country in the 19th century, and the work and the enterprise, the initiative, and the energy that they brought with them. Listen, modern New Zealand was created, actually. I do need to point this out to Tabitha Paul and her fellow travellers. Modern New Zealand was actually created in all of its formats, in all of its wonderment, by the British colonists of the 19th century. I'm sorry to have to point that out to you. From our language that we speak now, as I'm talking to you and conversing, our form of representative democracy, our economy and financial institutions and systems, our agriculture, our banks, our technology and transport, our construction and infrastructure, our education, our health, our legal, our welfare systems. There is no origin of any of the above that I have just pointed out to you that currently exists in New Zealand that is not inherently British and colonial settler in its origins. Maori had been here, it's true, for 600 years prior, but only for 600 years prior. They weren't here at the time when the Battle of Hastings was being fought, or the First Crusade was being launched. There was no one here. No one. That's what all of the anthropology tells us. Now, admittedly, Maori had their own cultures, customs, economy, and lifestyles. Few of those, can I say, of those Maori customs, culture, economy, and lifestyles would survive the same critical censure of the same wokesters you would think if some degree of logic was applied, which it never is, because it's only evidence that white people are evil and brown people are somehow, well, They were expelled from the Garden of Eden, weren't they? I mean, despite Maori's incessant warfare, their slavery, their cannibalism, the exploitation of the environment, the comparative lack of technology and progress, they were not, just quietly a perfect people. I mean, I know it's a bit of a revelation, but then who is, eh? Which of humanity can ever truly claim to be the best of us, the best that humanity can be? And in the 19th century, believe it or not, Empire Britain was probably it. Not just in terms of its technology and its innovations and its military power and progress, but also in terms of institutions and its view that, well, frankly, people, all people and peoples had merit. And if the British had ever wanted to think just quietly about, the modern day wokesters, have ever decided who would they have liked to have been colonised by? Of course, they wouldn't have liked to have been colonised by anybody else, but you couldn't have reached probably a more benign colonising force than the British of the 19th century. They had morals, they didn't always uphold them, but gee, that's the nature of humanity at the end of the day. They had decency. They didn't want to destroy Maori or send them into the sea. They wanted to educate them and to give them the gift, the greatest gift they could think of giving, which was essentially to make them brown British. I mean, that wasn't done out of, oh gosh, let's exterminate, let's commit some sort of genocide here. It was, well, these seem very noble chaps. I'm sure if they get a bit of education and a bit of civilization, they'll end up like us. Now, that's a fairly noble aim and intent. Just think for a moment if you're just given, I don't know, Ngā Pui or Ngāti Porou, if you're given Te Rapraha or Ngāti Taua, all of the forces, the infrastructures, the military power and technology that British existed at the time, what do you think would have been the outcome? Oh, yes, we do have a bit of hint of that in the past. The Musket Wars, that nobody really wants to talk about, and which why all the wokesters, when they want to talk about New Zealand history, want to start from the Treaty of Waitangi, because it's all a bit embarrassing, the narrative, prior to the 6th of February 1840. When cultures and civilizations collide, when they clash, and as in New Zealand, eventually coalesce, it does tend, though, to be Mr. Darwin's teachings that hold sway. The ablest, the fittest, the strongest, the most adaptive, always triumph. It's the nature of not simply humanity, but life. And what Tabitha Paul and the Greens and their fellow wokesters on the Wellington City Council, but throughout New Zealand, want to do is they want to deny that there was a superior civilization that came out in there in the 19th century, that created all of the great things that we have, an educated and literate workforce, the ability for Maori, note, to go anywhere with the education that they receive from this country and do any job at any level, anywhere in the international community of the 21st century. A welfare system that aims to protect people, particularly those who can't look after themselves. And more importantly, an economy in which everybody can contribute if they wish to, and if you can't, is there to aid and assist. I wonder what the average life expectancy of Maori was, do you think, in 1840? And then compare that with now. Look at the power, the prestige, and the ennobling, indeed, of the indigenous race, well, so-called indigenous race. They were here first of human beings, so I'm not going to go down that particular route. That's fine, they got here first. But it doesn't matter how long you've been here. It's the contribution, surely, to creating the country that we are now. And I have to say that the William Wakefields of this world, for all their imperfections, the Queen Victorias, for all of their astounding and absent leadership of that particular empire, at least from a New Zealand point of view, they are of deserving as respect and acknowledgement as, I don't know, someone who is savage and who was particularly mercenary and who offered no quarter of sympathy to any, whether Pākehā or Maori, someone like, Te Rapraha, who does have, in Otaki, for example, a monument to Plinth, and, it has to be said, a bust of his likeness that gazes out across all of the land that he conquered, not through force of ideas or ideology, but militarily and in a savage and violent way. But, no, they lived in the 19th century. We can no more judge Te Rauparaha than we can judge William Wakefield or Queen Victoria, because they lived in a different milieu. They didn't look at the world that we did, and maybe that's just as well, because they actually got on with it. They did stuff. They made things happen. They didn't sit there and moan and worry and wastrel about, well, frankly, whether or not they are observing the latest woke ideological fart that emanated from some university campus somewhere by somebody who was clearly drug-addled in the first place, and if they weren't drug-addled, then said read one too many Marxist Leninist books. I mean, the reality is New Zealand exists because we all contribute, and that includes our latest migrants to the countries, the Indians, the Chinese, the Filipinos, God, where would we be without them, the South Africans, the Pacific Islanders who've come to this country in the last 50, 60 years as well. Each are equal. Each have their own history. But can I say, when Tabitha Paul and the Greens and the Wellington City Council want to tear down the monuments because they don't fit their worldview and narrative of the 21st century, I'm not just looking at stupidity. I'm looking at a desire and a hatred of the people who came here. And it's exhibited on a daily basis. Well, can I just say, as somebody here who has... Oh, and can I just also point out to you, not just British blood flowing through their veins, that heritage and history and culture, and very proud of it I am too, but my other little part of blood that flows through me is a group of Maori who looked at Maori society and they think probably about the 16th or 17th century and said, nah, don't want a part of it. Too violent, too nasty, too short, too horrible. Let's go somewhere else, and settled in a peaceful society in the Chatham Islands, created a pacifist community where they all got on with each other until they were genocidally attacked and had genocide committed against them and enslaved by, I don't know, a couple of Maori tribes from Taranaki, utilising or misusing all the accoutrements. Now, nobody said no. Nobody said, let's tear down those particular sculptures. Let's make sure that those two Taranaki tribes are humiliated for attacking a peaceful people, that we should remember them as being somehow true terrorists of their time. No. We'll try and hide that history. The problem with history is that it isn't linear, and it isn't always happy, but it also isn't able to be judged by the narratives and standards of today. 200 years' time, if humanity's still alive, I'm sure they'll come back here, look at New Zealand in 2025 and go, God, they're primitive. God, they've just put up oh my God, they've just put up a statue. They put up a statue to a rugby player. See that rugby player? My God, that was the most violent sport. Oh, who knows what narratives they'll be exploiting in 200 years' time to condemn them today. I'm sure one of the narratives will be, dear Lord, they were idiots in those times. All right. So, those are my views this morning. Keep our statues up. It's our history and heritage. There are wonderful things that have been created by the people that we commemorate. They aren't perfect human beings. They never will be. But when you're perfect, as rather probably the only perfect human being that's ever lived said, then you can start casting the first stone. Tabitha Paul, concentrate on stuff that's important, will you? People who are really suffering. Stop worrying about what happened 2 years ago and start what happens in the next 2 years. That would be a good start.